And one day people shouted from YouTube, get your shit together or we're gonna unsubscribe. Well, the next thing you know, old Lance has lost his ass. First thing kinfolk, move away from here, man. California is the place he ought to be. So I loaded up my truck and I moved to Beverly. Hello once again. Today's early interjection is that I wanted to mention that in my productions, if you've never seen a Haphazard production, or if you look at a few of them, you'll notice I use these exact same images throughout all of my productions. I don't really change up my images, and for my videos, I use the same tired videos over and over again. That's because I don't know what I'm doing. I just downloaded a bunch of them. Here's the Addams Family, and here's just different videos that I use over and over again because I am not experienced in editing, and and so I just use the little bit that I have to create different productions over and over again because that's how it started working for me. I didn't have the intention to have any popularity on YouTube initially. I was getting tired of seeing the same thing over and over, so I thought I'd do a couple. So I wanted to mention that I am inept. Hey, White Tiger. There's White Tiger, and there's Mountain Cat over here, too. All right, I wanted to mention that because it's the truth. Hello once again. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is your happy, friendly, impromptu host, Lance Reynard. Thank you for the new subscriber. And I wanted to start out, of course, by thanking my subscribers, by popping into my comments, by mentioning my 91-year-old mother. I indulged her in a card game, and it was, the cash came out, and, it took a day and a half. But anyway, let's take a look at that. Coming to the comments, very nice compliment here. Thank you, Bondi Thomas. Call me, all right. Sorry, Bondi Thomas, not Blondie. Whack job. Awesome content. Okay. You have a new sub, and have you checked out Zeus? Yes. Yeah, Bondi, and I had to, and to use to grow my channel. Yeah, well, right. I was kind of trying to go the other way with it, in case you hadn't noticed. But thank you for the awesome compliment. And Victoria right? Of course, naturally, she's always right, Victoria, and thank you for I will keep them coming. And we got Crazy Cat. Born in the 60s, love Romper Room. Oh, and this, I see Alice and Joey, and I see Crazy Cat. Thank you, Crazy. It's Romper Room. Yes, I can't remember her name. I was Upper Midwest sort of a show, I believe, from Chicago to Minnesota, or to somewhere in that. Anyway, Gods of Egypt, thanks for the double thumbs up. Thomas Bezzy, always a pleasure. I give it a 10. And something to the song that I had concocted. Can't remember which one I played on that one. Might have been. I don't know. So thank you, Thomas. Always a pressure. And we have work cut out for us. Time to take down the 5G. Well, do what we can at least. Have some preventative measures. I keep a Bowie knife. Anyway, Captain WTF is reminding us that government does mean mind control, and entertainment does mean to get into and hold the mind. And so thank you for your comment, Captain WTF. And I often act like I really don't care about what I'm talking about, and that's just part of the persona that I convey because of my lack of giving a shit. And I don't mind being bitten, but I do have a special finger for many of the... but Randlar, top of the world, man. If it's registered, the king owns it. Yes, he does. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, no, singing. I was going to do... God hail the king or queen or whatever. They're the same these days. SAT malfunctions. Ain't had one in 26 years on the SAT system I installed. Oh, okay, right. And he's picking up his own SATs. I took my scores years ago. At any rate, those sunspots cooling things down. Is that the curious situation occurring now? Are the sunspots, this solar minimum, is it a part of it? And we have electromagnetic also. A lot of comments from Randall R. Appreciate all of this. I don't mean to absolutely blow by, but it is truth, that which he speaks, if you're looking at what he's talking about here in King George, and all the commercial interests remained intact. And they have permanent control over our international commerce, shipping ports. Well, it's all one system, gang. And for that reality to be projected to us, each country, as we're all separate. So let's just go kill the hell out of each other, kind of thing. But that's changing. I think overall it's changing. And and it's still ruled, right? We all are aware of these details. Mob rules, and we brought the mob in, and it's just, as I said, it's an accepted commonplace for us just to be a part of it. And people that are going, no, I won't take it, really have to. Unfortunately, we all do. And so let's be happy in our little cells. In one way to look at it, I have a solar maximum heater, says one mountain cat, hey mountain cat. And the solar heater that gives that cozy blush. Yeah, and solar maximum heater. That's a good thing to have, and have a way to warm yourself. Think about it. I've got a fireplace downstairs. It's working. It's clean. It's not a wood burner like I would prefer, but I'm in a city area. However, the house is just full of wood. So to keep warm, and then we have a boatload of supplies tucked away because my mother and sister are hoarders. So aren't you, Nate says. Hi, Lance. No, thank you. I couldn't agree. He's talking about the shattering the cancer, the New World Order, reversed agendas. And I couldn't agree with you more about the Captain Kirk, where I was talking about. He's showing all of the it's looking at the photographs, looking at the images of the past that gives us so many curious details to ponder today and to come to some certain conclusions about as to whether or not they could have built something so massive and you think about what it would take today to build some of the structures that we look at, and in this way we're looking at our history and questioning these details of history, of course, naturally. DN says at 11:37, the building looks like the Colosseum with a top on it, and yes, that it was in Captain Kirk's video that he showed Colosseum structure with a cap or dome on the top of it. And I noticed that Susie Bird also mentions about domes on buildings and the reverse electromagnetic stuff that she puts out. So that's fairly interesting. Logan, always a pleasure. Logan up on the frozen tundra. He's got it together. He knows how to handle it in the icy cold. I like him could live in an ice cube, and knowing how to handle it inside of an ice cube is part of the fun. You can actually make it quite comfortable. I've built my own igloos and underground facilities personally. But I'm just a normal man who owns nothing except for the knowledge in my head. Joseph Brandenburg always sends in fantastic links which lead me to incredible discoveries. So I very often have to take him out of the spam folder and out of the held for review. I mean, there's probably 6 of them in here. If I flip over to held for review, here we have Joseph, and Joseph. And thank you. Go ahead and continue to send these. I don't consider them to be spam, but I haven't had time to go through them. And Jay Hall says the cradle of the symbolism used in masonry in all masonry is placed by many of the best authorities in that country, which they believe is first inhabited. Now he has a extremely long essay here that I am just going to briefly go through. So if somebody wants to lock or pause their screen and read it all, he is making some very interesting points. And so, thought I've got a few more comments to go through. Let me just thumb back down, and hopefully that screen jumping isn't too overly oppressive. But I wanted to mention Dennis Branham. I was always putting out videos about what he's seeing outside, about his cat. And love the cat, Dennis. And Mal Ryan says the information that Brian and Mia present, okay, yeah, they're a special take as long as you pay for it. You notice I don't ask you for money, and yeah, I don't depend on you guys for money. We're just having some fun here. I'm not going to pressure you in anything. Unit Baz, thanks for the compliment. I very much appreciate some of these. Like to get into a little bit of the mud flood coming off of volcanoes. But to look at these details, I think the important thing is to consider what has happened, what can happen, but more importantly, what are you prepared for what actually could happen or is happening at this particular moment. And it's a little difficult to be prepared when your house gets flooded up to the ceiling or a fire comes raging across your home. You just got to vacate and GTFO, and are you prepared for that? And so it's not a matter of panic, it's more a matter of consideration and thought. Because no matter where you are, being prepared psychologically first, and also then, with enough clothing, with the right type of clothing, and tools and equipment right at your handy. So if you got to vacate, you got to bail out right now, what can you grab and go with? All right. So thank you, Alan Senior Hargis, for your information. Go your own direction, or just along for the ride here. And yeah, I don't need subservience, but in the same respect, consideration. And also, what am I really talking about? That argument channel was not really about that. So I don't want to have to explain. 88 Shinto, muchas gracias. Always sends in excellent comments. Pop in, go through some of my comments, and have some appreciation for each other. I go into your channels. Autumn, love ya. We'll talk to you soon, and let's get into today's Azad Mamadov. I can't stop. Captain Kirk, always a pleasure, man. All right, guys, let's get into today's essay. I would like to start out in this part by mentioning that in order for me to create a video, I look at other people's videos, consider whether or not volcanoes are a hoax, whether or not Unveiling a Titan. Let's take a look at Unveiling a Titan briefly. In some of the directions that these comments go, you can see right here in my history. Greta and the Walking Dead Superpowers is one. 5 Reasons Vatican C. This is one actual video I put out. And the frequency of bursting cells. So these 3 videos right here were one of my videos. And now this one I wanted to mention along with Unveiling a Titan. So this is dealing with mudflows. Now what I wanted to mention was that when I create a production, I first of all need to watch this 1-hour video and make an assessment on it. But as I speak here and now and look at what's showing on the screen, what he is communicating about is the subduction.
Floor offshore, and the ocean floor to the west of that trench is coming at us. Ocean floor off the coast of Washington is moving. It's moving inches a year, and it's moving towards us. And this ocean crust is diving under Washington at this oceanic trench. This is a cross-section of the same thing. It's the Juan de Fuca plate, not the Pacific plate. It's the Juan de Fuca plate that is subducting. This is the Juan de Fuca plate, it's underwater. This is the Juan de Fuca plate, it's underwater.
And so it is this subducting plate that pushes down. Of course, the magma is created
It's generating large volumes of magma at the deep levels in the crust. That magma is rising
and creating volcanoes. Now this is the way, and of course water all comes into play here. It's not just magma in rock. There are a lot of other factors that are involved. The amount of silica that is in the area is another factor on the viscosity of the magma.
And the magma eventually gets to the surface and erupts. That's why we have these cones. I'm saying that we've had Juan de Fuca plate subduction and Juan de Fuca plate generated magma for 40 million years, and therefore we've had these volcanoes in this Cascade corridor for 40 million years. However, I am not saying that Mount Rainier is 40 million years old. I know it sounds like I just did, but I didn't. Here it is again. The Cascades as a whole are 40 million years old. Individual cones have a short lifespan. Individual cone volcanoes have a 2 million year lifespan. This is still poorly understood why you develop a cone here, 2 million years worth of eruptions and lahars and everything else, and then the volcano dies. And the magma chamber hardens. And the volcano literally gets erased, gets removed. And someplace else magma comes up from the subduction zone. 40 million years of volcanism, but we don't have 40 million years worth of individual cones. Instead, and you can now anticipate this, I think, that there are way more X's in here. This is tic-tac-toe if I've been drinking. What do you suppose these X's are? That's right. Those where the cones used to stand. Each X is a place where the cone used to stand. And you're like, I don't get it. Well, how do we even know where the cones aren't there? So how do we know they were even standing in a particular place? The answer is, even if you remove the magma, even if you shut off the supply of magma to a cone, and you stop the puffs of ash and steam and lava flows, even if you start physically eroding that mountain, there's still two pieces of evidence to prove that that cone used to exist. What's one way? One way is to hike into the Goat Rocks, hike into your favorite Cascade area that's made out of granite. The granite is magma chamber rock. The granite is the result of freezing up that originally molten material in the magma chamber. Big blotches of granite, like the Snoqualmie batholith, are places that tell us where these cones used to stand. But there's another piece of field evidence. There are scraps of volcanic mudflow, or lahars, that are way older than 2 million years old. So here's stuff that's coming out of a volcano that far outlives the cone that made it. And that's the story with the volcanic mudflows, or the lahars, outside of Ellensburg. If you go to Thorpe and you find these lahars, and we will look at them, they are 10 million years old. The volcanic mudflows outside of Ellensburg are 10 million years old. Okay? Which volcano? Can't be one of the present ones, right? Why not? They're too young. They only last for 2 million years. So now we've got to find one of those X's that's 10 million years old, where we used to have a cone, and we have figured that out. That cone used to stand east of the divide in Bumping Lake, between Yakima and White Pass. There's plutonic igneous rock up there that tells us exactly where that cone used to stand. And a river, these are volcanic mudflows that follow river valleys, a river used to flow from the Bumping Lake area to Thorpe. And that's impossible today because we have Menashtash Ridge and other ridges, but this is before those ridges grew. And so we have volcanic mudflow telling us where that old valley was to be. That's how we have volcanic mudflows here, but we don't face the prospect of volcanic mud coming to us at all in eastern Washington today. So, how can you argue with a place like this? Micah Kipple taking some photos for us. Wonderful, wonderful, awe-inspiring, poetry-inspiring. How can you be blasé about these scenes? And this sentinel is presiding over much of the Pacific Northwest, as we well know. This is Tacoma, downtown Tacoma, looking up at this mountain. And we got chatter in the room. You're all excited. That's good. Where's that? I don't know. Where's that? I think I was there. Did you take that one? Great. So if I could take Jerry up to the mountain, one key piece of evidence that this mountain is alive is the base of the glacial ice on Mount Rainier has been dealing with the heat coming off of the mountain like a radiator. So there's these wonderful caves carved by running water and steam and heat coming off the mountain. This is a steam cave or an ice cave that does not exist anymore because this particular glacier retreated. But if we get to the top in the summit craters themselves, this is back in the 1890s, and we have these little reports, these eyewitness reports of steam coming from these summit craters. So there's beautiful, circular, fresh as a daisy, summit craters of Mount Rainier. That might be enough to convince Jerry if we could get him in a helicopter looking down on these beautiful, very fresh-looking summit craters. And Gene Keever from Eastern Washington did some exploration, as well as Jack Powell from Ellensburg back in the 70s, mapping many of those caves. Is this underground? We're at 14,410 feet above sea level, on top of Mount Rainier, with all these wonderful caves at the base of the glacier at the summit of Mount Rainier. Wonderful. So that's up high. Now, we know that if we have prevailing winds, which generally blow west to east, us folks in Eastern Washington will be receiving and have received a brunt of this ash snowing out of the sky. We all can remember Mount St. Helens, but Rainier has done this as well. Here's Rainier Park, and each color is a distinctly identified tephra layer, ash layer, that has a specific chemistry and a specific date. And we've got many of these. You can dig pits like this at Sunrise, which is a particular spot in Rainier Park, and these are just textbooks, just reading the history of Rainier, and even some of these ashes are in Rainier, but they actually came from St. Helens. Beautiful layer cake geology, but just thousands of years instead of tens of millions like we normally do in lectures like these. If we are in Eastern Washington and we are due east of the mountain, we can expect this ash. Now, this is a publication long ago speculating on chances of getting ash coming out of the sky in the communities to the east of St. Helens. I'm not an emergency official. I'm not comfortable doing all sorts of predictions and probabilities. I'm pretty weak with stats anyway, so I prefer to just look at the past and make sure we understand how to interpret the past. These ash layers get finer as you get farther, generally from the source. And here we are in Ellensburg. Here's Yakima. Here's the mountain. So we're in for some interesting deposits coming down the road. Of course, the question is, what does down the road mean? Next Thursday? Next year? Next decade? Next century? 1,000 years from now? We still cannot predict to that level of precision. Some of you know this in the Yakima River Canyon. We're 2/3 of the way down the canyon heading to Yakima, and there's some beautiful ash beds. You've noticed them, I'm sure, on the west wall. For a long time, people thought those were from Mount Mazama, ash falling out of the sky from southern Oregon. We've done some relatively recent work on this, and the chemistry in the age does not look like it's Mount Mazama. And it could very well be Mount Rainier ash fall in Yakima Canyon. Still unsure exactly, and would love to solve that in the next 20 years if we can get somebody to work on that more carefully. Broadening the scope to the Cascades, there's a 1-to-1 correlation between subduction of the Juan de Fuca plate and this line of volcanoes, which is not just in Washington, of course, but goes from BC down to Northern California. And this is the connection. God, if we could somehow stop this Juan de Fuca plate from subducting, we'd stop the magma generation, we'd stop these volcanoes, and we wouldn't have to worry about any action with Mount Rainier and volcanic mudflows coming down to Jerry's place in Enumclaw. But as long as that subduction continues, the magma continues as well, etc. This is an iconic plot from just the last 4,000 years. I gave you a dose of how much history we're really talking about with the Cascades as a whole, 40.
All right, I'm going to stop this or just pause it for a moment and let you kind of soak this in as considerative information. And taking a look at the timelines. I've always been curious about the regulation of timelines, as well as most of the truthers, or what we call ourselves, observers. Scientific observers is another way to put it, I suppose, to take a look at these volumes and locations And I'm going to leave the link in my description for this particular video. And just to avoid you from having to go back into it, I will play this for another few minutes.
Million, and individual cones 2 million, and Rainier being 500,000. I don't know if I said that, but I'm saying it now. Rainier has been around for 500,000 years, but this is just the last 4,000 years. And looking at ash deposits and a few lahars to talk about potential interest. So again, to the beautiful mountain. I'm intrigued. There's all this buzz in the room. I'm very interested in your reaction here. I'm glad you're liking it. So at least we can go up to Rainier and go, God, this is like a living museum. These old growth stuff. We're inside the park boundary. There hasn't been any logging. It's kind of a living museum to what Washington was like botanically, even though I know nothing about plants. And we get up into the mountain. We've got all this wonderful glacial ice. Have you heard this? You take the amount of glacial ice on this mountain, it equals all the glacial ice on all the other 16 Cascade volcanoes together. This is a different scene. This is a monster, and worth our respect, of course. And we can approach the park from different spots. Many of us in Ellensburg drive up 410 and we cross over at Chinook Pass. Maybe we're going to Paradise if we take another route, which is a famous place to visit on the south part of the mountain. And you take a little day hike with somebody who doesn't even walk very well, but you can get into these kinds of scenes with paved trails. Even the most inexperienced person out in the outdoors can have this kind of experience. Amazing. And that's why it's such a popular place, Us locals don't go up there on a Saturday in July because we know it's going to be a zoo up there. All right. I prefer sunrise. The crowds are slightly less, but still kind of zoo-like on occasion. But sunrise is important for our Osceola discussion tonight, which we really haven't even sunk our teeth into yet, I might add. That's coming if you're feeling gypped at this point.
I wanted to precede this with, just prior to the mud flood information that he gets into right about here. Let's just
After all this is published, they see Mount St. Helens essentially do what they were talking about decades earlier. So my hat's off to all those wonderful USGS geologists who put these publications together. Here's a geologic map put out in the 1960s of Mount-Rainier Park. These pink things are the andesite lava flows that are ending within the national park. We don't have Hawaiian lavas coming to Tacoma, right? No lava map put out in the 1960s of Mount-Rainier Park. These pink things are the andesite lava flows that are ending within the national park. We don't have Hawaiian lavas coming to Tacoma, right? No lava flows leaving the national park, essentially. But all this beautiful annotation of all these spots and the geologic significance, again, from these publications pre-1980. This is the White River that's going to be a key part of our Osceola story in just a second. I'm just giving you a sense of what's out there, produced by the United States Geological Survey before the St. Helens activity. So in a small group of geologists, they knew what the potential was for Rainier, and they knew that St. Helens would do something similar if St. Helens happened to go before Rainier, and of course it did. So this is what some of these publications look like, handed down to me from Don Ring, who was in the geology department for 30 years. Look at these old photos and how precarious these layers are up on the flanks of Rainier. If I could take Jerry up there and talk about how rotten this rock is and the steepness of these angled slabs on the mountain, maybe he'd be a little less confident about his statements. This is a volcanic mud flow from more than 2,000 years ago, not the Osceola, but this is a mapped deposit that was determined that the west flank failed and flowed. It's called the Round Pass mud flow, a little more than 2,000 years ago. And this is just a taste of the number of volcanic mud flows. Remember, there were 55 of these found, and I want to make sure I give credit to the guy who's done this work in just a second. His name is Dwight Crandall, and we'll get there, but I'm ahead of myself. So this is a spot that's very important. This is what this Osceola mud flow looks like. And what we've been doing recently is trying to get more attention to the actual deposit, because these old grainy black and white photos are probably not doing the trick. Before we do that, let's remind ourselves, and we got a room full of people, most of you are over 50, you all have stories of where you were on this morning. I wish we had time to listen to everybody's stories. We have time to listen to none of your stories tonight. But at 8:32 on Sunday morning, May 18th, 1980, we had a complete transformation of Mount St. Helens. Please don't be confused now. We've left Rainier for a bit, right? We've left Mount Rainier. This is Mount St. Helens, and we're at Mount St. Helens to conceptualize what Rainier has done many times and use this as a parallel. So before the eruption of 1980, many in the geology world were assuming that St. Helens, when it did erupt, especially during those weeks of a buildup before the event, it was assumed that it would be a vertical eruption. And in fact, there were even evacuation plans for homeowners around Mount St. Helens, and they drew concentric circles around the mountain. Said if you're in the red, you're out. If you're in yellow, I guess you can come on the weekends. If you're green, whatever. But nobody ever was talking about a lateral or sideways blast. And unfortunately, that's what happened. That was the big surprise and the big learning lesson from Mount St. Helens. It erupted sideways. So this is a photo a week before the event. Most of the snow and ice that Jerry was talking about, he wasn't talking about St. Helens, but most of the snow and ice is gone. Magma has come up to shallow levels. And I'm sorry to report, this is the last evening of this gentleman's life. His name was David Johnston, a young geologist. This is a Saturday evening. He's on a folding chair. He's working for the U.S. Geological Survey. He's full of optimism. By all accounts, a wonderful, generous, nice fellow. Somebody snapped this picture of him, and he was taking measurements between his ridge and the face of St. Helens. This is an old technique to keep measuring the distance using lasers to figure out how much that north face of St. Helens was growing. The tragedy is today, David would not have needed to be there. We have instruments that can do this without people involved. But he was there, 3 ridges to the north. Everybody agreed, a safe spot. But again, this mountain blew sideways, and he was killed in the first few seconds after that explosion. He had enough time to radio into his bosses in Vancouver, Washington, the home base of the USGS at the time. But he did not survive. And there's a Johnston Visitor Center and a Johnston Ridge named in David's honor. So these are the only photos we have of those first few seconds, taken by a camper 10 miles away, Gary Rosenquist. And Gary sold these photos to, I think, Time Magazine or one of those big publications. And we don't have any video of those first few seconds that claimed David's life. But the effect of that initial gas blast and the pyroclastic flow, of course, is profound. And are we talking about this with Rainier? We are. We're talking about all of these things at a much larger scale with Mount Rainier, with thousands of eruptions over the last 500,000 years. We're still at St. Helens. We're realizing this is a thing. This is a big thing. This is 57 casualties. We are not minimizing this drama and this tragedy from Mount St. Helens. But again, we're taking a moment to realize that we can learn from St. Helens and help us better visualize what's to come with Mount Rainier. This is Ellensburg, downwind of St. Helens on a Sunday afternoon, just after 12 o'clock noon. So much ash in the sky that the sky is dark. My 19-year-old students on campus usually gasp. They're like, oh my God, really? You all remember that, and we don't need to go there further. The next morning, little skiff of ash. This is ash, not snow, in May, about 1/4 of an inch of ash. But do you remember it was more than the ash story with Mount St. Helens? With this face of St. Helens that did what? A landslide. It failed. We had a mudflow. We had a lahar come down the Toutle River. And so
now here we start with the mudflow. So at the risk of losing my copyright on this particular video, I hope that you are able to see how all of these details apply to the mud flood information. If you look at, or we look at, the maps of yesterday and the locations of details and consider some of these. Now I'm going to let this play, as I mentioned, at the risk of losing my copyright on this, because of the information about to be related over the next 9 minutes or so.
Ash. But do you remember it was more than the ash story with Mount St. Helens? with this face of St. Helens that did what? A landslide. It failed. We had a mudflow. We had a lahar come down the Toutle River. And so we even have a volcanic mudflow to study from Mount St. Helens. And these are photos in the weeks and months after that event in May of 1980. Again, Mount St. Helens, the Toutle River. Look at the size of these blocks being carried by this volcanic mudflow. Pieces of the cone, St. Helens' cone, carried downstream. The thickness of the mud, people walking around for scale. And this is a miniature version of a mudflow compared to the Osceola, as we will see soon enough. There's a hippie for scale. And there's the height of the mud coming down the valley. The Toutle River, major damage, volcanic mudflow in addition to everything else. Very good. So we go back to Mount-Rainier and look at the possibilities in the future, but of course, looking primarily at the Osceola mudflow, which was a much larger event than what we just looked at. Yes, Mount-Rainier is an active volcano. Wonderful, thank you. Now we decided with this new PBS series we have to make a 5-minute episode on this Osceola, and this will act as a springboard for us to start looking very carefully at the Osceola mudflow. This is Chris Smart, who works with me at Central, a gifted videographer and editor. We took a day last August. Well, you need a good day, right? You can't deal with Mount-Rainier unless you got a bluebird day. And so we were out there filming down low, up the river valley, the White River Valley where this mudflow came from. We found an exposure, thanks to some geologists tipping us off on where to find a good exposure of the Osceola mudflow. And then when we finally shared this, I was surprised at the reaction. A bunch of people said, look, that shot, you weren't actually up there. You were in a TV studio, right? That was like a green screen, like that looked too perfect. I'm sure you weren't actually standing there. We wouldn't do that. We wouldn't do that. So I want to prove to you that we were up there. Here's Chris at Tipsoo Lake. All right, we got cars whizzing by. We got insects we're trying to deal with on whatever it was, a Friday morning. And I really need to prove this to you.
We're going to do...
Bug. Car noise. You hear it?
Wait. Let me get steady. Okay.
This is easily the tallest mountain in all the Pacific Northwest, but it used to be taller by more than 1,000 feet. I know it looks fake, but we were there, I promise.
Now, just wanted to add a little bit of emergency detailed data information in the relationship to mud flows, mud floods, and areas that people live in. And what we are looking at right here is Washington State.
Map for Mount Baker up by Bellingham. And
I'm going to interject and just say I'm going to show a little bit of emergency information, then get into some Titanic mud fossil information, and then end the video. So,
of future lahars coming down the Nooksack to Bellingham Bay and down the Skagit River to Mount Vernon and Cedro Woolley. The Glacier Peak, which is a remote Cascade volcano but still active, and the potential for volcanic mudflows coming down, again, the Skagit and the Stilly. The Mount Adams scene has volcanic mudflows that have been mapped. And coming down those drainages. And of course, Mount St. Helens with the Toutle River. Every one of the Cascade volcanoes in the Northwest, including Oregon and Northern California, has this volcanic mudflow story. Rainier has certainly not cornered the market. But this is the original. This is Dwight Rocky Crandall making these maps with not only the Osceola, but the Electron mudflow and the Paradise mudflow, and he was way ahead of his time, mapping these things out long before people really understood the role and the significance and, of course, the danger of these volcanic mudflows. If you're curious, if you have a friend who lives in Buckley or Ording, and they hear or they see on Twitter or something that Rainier is starting to erupt in a big way, how much time do they have to get out of Ording, let's say? There's lots of factors involved, but there are drills, of course, to evacuate people as best you can, and you just want to get people on high ground as much as you possibly can. And so in Ording, the general rule of thumb, as I understand it, is you got about an hour. Rainier starts a major landslide, that's going to convert to a mud flow. Let's say it's coming down the Puyallup River. You've got about an hour before that mud flow is going to arrive in Ording. You've got an hour and a half before it gets to Puyallup. You got maybe 2 hours before it arrives in downtown Tacoma. That's if it's a major event. That's if. There's lots of ifs. But that's the kind of timing we're talking about. And you go, well, gee, I don't know. I think I could get out of a valley in an hour. Well, I don't know. There's a few neighbors as well. Right. Good. So there are evacuation routes, just like there are tsunami evacuation routes on the Washington coast. We have a ways to go before we can really get ourselves educated, number one, and then drilled appropriately. Remember now, I'm hearing a murmur again. You recognize this. This is close to home. This is just outside of Ellensburg, the Dudley Cliffs. These are volcanic mudflows. Oh my God, should we be worried? No. Do you remember? We have the Cascade crest now to protect us. This is Mt.Rainier, the cone today, the topic of our discussion tonight. Just outside of the park, over in the Bumping Lake area, there is granite rock. This is the old magma chamber for what? A 10-million-year-old volcano that was standing right here that sent a volcanic mud flow down the Bumping River that eventually went to Thorpe. Remember? Extinct, gone, active here. We don't have to worry. We do not have to worry. I repeat, we do not have to worry. There's plenty of things to worry about, not about this in Ellensburg. This is from a video program long ago, just to give you a taste. Those familiar mountains have been standing for less than 2 million years. And these Thorpe lahars are 10 million years old. That means we have deposits here that have long outlived their source. Careful research by field geologists have concluded that the old cone-shaped volcano that erupted 10 million years ago to make these deposits once stood between Yakima and White Pass. And our lahars flowed down river valleys that once connected that area with Thorpe. So there's even a fact.
Okay, now considering this seems to be a good spot to stop with this petrified piece here, or let's just go a little bit more.
Lahars with petrified wood.
There we go. Now we have petrified wood in the lahar. And speaking of petrification, let's get into the next part of this video. I hope you found this interesting and gave you some information that you didn't know prior to this. And so, in the grand scheme of things, looking at petrified biology and the possibilities of, or thereof, looking at the timelines that are given by scientists, geologists, paleontologists, and then the individual, Google Earth people, the people that scour the earth, I should say, and also do comparative analysis and realities. I mean, they're in there walking around looking at their observations in comparison to actual biology. And what they're looking at is a viscous material on the back of the eye, vitreous material, I should say, and how they find in this huge structure that they're walking through a crystalline content. So this is put out by Stellium 7. Comment, like, and subscribe to Stellium 7 for their considerations. And the reason, of course, that I bring these things up is for our, because they support two different sides. One supports this side and the other one supports that. If you look at the textures on this rock in comparison to the lecture that I was just showing, and the layers, the difference in types of texture, and the layers of the volcanic expulsions in comparison to formations of rock of this nature. And so these are the comparative realities of our lives, and are they petrified biology? And is some of it, and where do the expulsions and explosions come from in the volcanic details, as it says in the other video, subduction. This isn't that type of rock, and this is a bonish rock. And so these observations, is that an eyeball? Ancient alien conspiracy theorists say yes. And here in the Haphazard channel, I look at both sides, and I would like to end this video. Please end this video by saying that people have the right to believe in what they want to believe in, as long as it agrees with my opinion. And once again, enjoy, have fun, lighten up. And there's no wrong or harm or problem in looking at the possibilities and considering the layering that is in here. And if it were a mammoth, I mean, these guys are walking through the eye and doing comparisons, where I am just sitting and staring at the wall, going, "Hey, that's kind of cool." So, to whatever degree, I will continue to compare details. Do a little more Google Earth. This was going to get too long, so I'm going to end it here, and appreciate the new subscribers, comments, and shares that I've gotten. Thank you so very much, and I will put out a new production as soon as possible, and keep my mother in line. Keep her in line. So I'll talk to you soon, and have a great day, and be good to each other and yourself. Hasta la vista, baby, and adios, amigos.